What's the time now? Is it time to start? 6:30. Yeah. Okay. Namaste. Namaste. Thank you. Am I audible to everyone? I think there's still a few. I think Abhishek might. You want to? Sure. Yeah.
Well, feel free to take your snacks and take cups of tea and come and sit and go again for a refill. Well, thank you. Good evening to everybody, and thank you for coming today in good numbers. I see there's quite a bit of interest on learning about Sanskrit, and we're really fortunate to have amongst us Martin, who has... Please feel free to take those sofas as well, yeah. We're very pleased to have Martin amongst us, who is really a scholar in Sanskrit, and he has got impeccable credentials, been to many continents, learnt a lot, himself being a linguist, and developed an expertise in Sanskrit. And as you know later, he's also serving Sanskrit by making it more accessible through use of technology. So you're a key player in promoting and propagating Sanskrit, and also telling the world about the beauty that is Sanskrit. I won't speak much about Sanskrit, and won't speak anything about Sanskrit because Martin will have to correct me then. I studied Sanskrit till class 8, but after that I lost touch. Many students in India, they learn Sanskrit in early years, but later on, for one reason or the other, we are not able to continue with that. But I would just give one fact to you that in India we have 22 official languages and more than 19,500 dialects. So which is a good number, and I also forgot there are 99 other languages. So 22 official languages which are mentioned in the Constitution of India, 99 other languages, and 19,500 dialects. And Martin, correct me if I'm wrong, most of these languages and dialects, they owe their origin to Sanskrit. Be it in North India, be it in South India, every language has been inspired and taken a lot from Sanskrit, and also went on its own journey. So thank you, Martin, and thank you everybody for joining us today in this journey through the treasure of Sanskrit. Martin, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Abhishek, for the wonderful introduction. And namaste, and welcome to this little piece of India. I see the consulate that technically is a part of India, I guess, and a part of South Africa. And I'm born in Cape Town, and I've been dwelling in India since 2003. And what took me to India was they say like all roads lead to Rome, but I found most roads lead to India, even the Roman roads, because if you start to scratch beneath the surface with more or less any subject, be it history, history of languages, even as Abhishek was saying, large number of the Indian languages are coming from Sanskrit. Even English, as you'll see in the presentation, is in the same tree as Sanskrit. And when we're speaking English, we're actually subconsciously using a lot of Sanskrit roots and words without even knowing it. And we're going to really, it's a massive subject. We have 45 minutes to an hour for the discourse, and then some questions. And I'm going to share with you the work we've been doing. We have an institute in a beautiful place in India. I'm just going to share a bit about that place. What brought me to Sanskrit was I was the son of a doctor in Cape Town. I was very interested in medicine. I studied Chinese medicine, which led me, my teachers couldn't answer a lot of questions, so it led me to something called Ayurveda, or Ayurvidya, depending how you word it. Once I'd started to study Ayurveda, I wanted to read the literature, and the literature is written in a language called Sanskrit. And once I had that desire to read the literature, I was kept busy for a number of years, and I made a vratam, or a vow. I said, I'm going to master this language, and the only way I could see rationally, like when Elon Musk speaks, he likes to talk about probabilities of success, and the only probability of a high success for learning Sanskrit for me was to do it at university, because it's such a vast and deep subject. They say it needs 12 years of traditional studies. Now, usually in India it starts at the age of 5. You'll know, Abhishek, about the Gurukul system, and you're with the Guru, it's repeating, just basically memorizing things before you understand them, and it slowly percolates through your system, and eventually you start to do the Vyakaran and the grammar and the rules. And I didn't have the 12 years, so I looked at all the universities in the world, and I found one where I was happy with the professor, and I started to study at university. And my background was in computer science, so while I was studying, I said, hey, I can be useful to Sanskrit. And living in Oroville, which is a place about being useful to the world, it just made sense. So I came to study Sanskrit through an interest in medicine, in Ayurvedic medicine, and it was basically a very long and deep journey, and I'm still very much on the journey. I'll be back in India in October at a computational linguistics and Sanskrit conference presenting at the Kanakpur IIT, which is actually the top institution in India. I'm very much looking forward to that. So we're going to start with a prayer. Maybe some of you, it's a Subhashita. Maybe some of you know it. If you know it, Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai Shanti. So, I'll just switch this on. The organization that I started in Oroville was called, well, it is called the Sanskrit Research Institute, and it's part of Oroville. Has anyone heard about Oroville? It is a UNESCO recognized project that was formed to create a conscious community and city where people from all nations can come together, do research, develop consciousness, and forge a much better future for humanity. And a large amount of the success of the work that I've done has been because I've based it in such a wonderful environment. It's very difficult when you're in a place where everything is going in the opposite direction, but in Oroville there's been limitless support, and in India, of course, from many people in India. Once they've seen that this guy from South Africa has taken to their language, there's been a lot of support and goodwill for the work I've been doing. And here's where we are. It's in Southeast India. If anyone saw The Life of Pi, the zoo is right there, 12 kilometers from my home, and the institute, and everyone is welcome to visit. We will feed you, we'll give you a place to stay. This is a place you must visit. It should be on your bucket list, Oroville. This is our team currently. It changes all the time. The beautiful thing about Oroville is we have a gift economy where people come, and very highly skilled people. We've had PhD level, double PhD, and dancers, one tax accountant from Belgium. People fall in love with Sanskrit just like I did. People fall in love with India, and then they want to give some of themselves towards it. So these are the team that have produced what I'm going to share with you in the second part of the presentation. The first part is just going to talk a bit about Sanskrit and maybe some different perspectives on the language and why it's something of great significance to mankind. In the second part, I'll share with you what we've done with the language and why we did it, and where we're going, what's our next step. So Oroville was a barren land. It looked a bit like the Karoo, just empty, void of all trees. This is how it looks today. That's our water tower made of earthen bricks. We have 2,700 residents from 53 countries. It's a very unique place. And the charter was that it belongs to the entire of humanity, not to any country or to any individual. It's a place of service, seva, It's a place for unending education, to keep learning. It's a place for progress and to bridge the past and the future, which is what we're doing. Sanskrit has got one foot in the past, and it's also a very modern language, you're going to see in the presentation. That's why linguists find it fascinating. A place of research. We're very much engaged in research in Oroville, and a place for cultivating unity and harmony. And this is just a glimpse. I can send you, of course you can visit the website, but I can send you more details. But this is just some sort of Polaroids of a day, life in Oroville. These are farms, and we grow even cotton, we make our own roads. Besides that, there's consulting outside for institutions worldwide and in India, sharing what we've learned, sharing our philosophy and renewable technologies. It is an eco-village, so it's very much ecological. I was using an electric car there since 2008, long before they started to become popular in Norway and America. South Africa's got a little bit to catch up there. So just in numbers, Oroville has 10 schools, and it's only 20, that's quite a high ratio. 7 plus 7 outreach schools. That means schools that we educate the rural villagers who wouldn't have access to such a quality education easily. And so it's basically about lifting up the people around. It's not just about having a wonderful place, but also bringing everyone to a higher standard of consciousness and living together. And we've planted some 3 million trees. This is all on the different websites of Oroville. And actually, another project that I have is called CEDAR, which is, we're busy incubating the project. That is to take Oroville as a model and also look at places like South Africa, where we have a lot of strife, and creating these micro solutions of harmony, peace and safety, and then also of growth and of consciousness. I know Art of Living, Pramila was also, they were considering projects like this, and I think Oroville is a place that everyone who's interested to look for solutions for South Africa or any challenges that the world's facing should visit. And on our 50th birthday, we took soil from all the nations in the world. People brought soil. This is the Nakashima Peace Table, where people come from to resolve disputes and sit around it. It's made from a single ancient tree, fallen tree. And when we founded Oroville, we took soil from 124 nations. And that's in the midpoint, the Brahma Bindu, the absolute center of the community is soil. So I think you can get the idea that places, it's thinking about mankind as a one, not as individuals. And yeah, it's good to, we have our pavilions. We have the Pavilion of India, we have African Pavilion. We have all the identities, but the idea is that we forge a common harmony, that we're all human before everything else. And now we go on to Sanskrit. So Sanskrit has been there for millennia in India, but the Europeans, when India was colonized by the British, they rediscovered Sanskrit, and it led to an incredible revival of subjects such as logic and linguistics. And you'll see some of the quotes. These are notable Western scholars, just to give you an idea of the magnanimity of this subject. Will Durant said it's the mother of Europe's languages, the mother of our philosophy, mother through the Arabs of our mathematics. In other words, the subject has traveled through another culture to one. And mother through the Buddha of the ideals of Christianity, mother through the village community of self-government and democracy. India is in many ways the mother of us all. And Wilhelm von Humboldt, he was a German linguist, he said it's the unsurpassed zenith in the whole development of languages yet known to us. And Max Müller, the famous Indologist, said it's the greatest language in the world. Leonard Bloomfield, who was a linguist, and this was when Chomsky was also very much influenced by this, he said it's one of the greatest monuments of human intelligence. And I would agree, after rather deep study, I would say that it is a great monument of human intelligence, and everyone should know about it. I know that there is a strong wish in India to share through yoga, and I think that hopefully this presentation will inspire people to discover more about this subject. So the word Sanskrit, or Samskrita, is the correct pronunciation. It means perfected. And there is an older word that's sometimes used called Bhasha. And if you go to Indonesia, you'll see the language is called Bahasa. So once you've studied Sanskrit, you start to join all these dots. The language in the Maldives also is a Sanskrit-derived language from Vedic Sanskrit. It's split off from India because it was an island state. They didn't get much external influence till quite late. And Sanskrit you will see throughout the whole of South Asia and parts of the Middle East. You will also see, we're going to cover that, has basically spread its wonder and its magic. So it's an Indo-European language, that's the classification. Now, half of the world, including myself now, is speaking Indo-European. That's 3.2 billion speakers. It has a documented history of 3,500 years, and I say documented, that starts with the Rig Veda. Maybe you've heard about the Vedic chanting. We're going to listen to a little bit of it. There is a history before. People often like to say it's there from the beginning of time and all that. Those are, as a scholar, we have to say we can trace to 1500 BC, and we know that there was an oral tradition long before that, but we don't know exactly when it began. It's lost in the mists of time. And something that people often don't realize, and this is something that I'm putting quite a lot of attention onto with our institute, it has the largest body of written material in the world prior to the invention of printing. So if we think of, we have technological milestones like electricity, even speech is a technological milestone if you look at the evolution of man. Printing was Gutenberg, and then now we have, of course, instant distribution through the internet. It's another milestone. But before that, it was the manuscriptic traditions. And in Sanskrit, you have the largest amount of knowledge stored. And you're going to see how large it is shortly. It's very important for linguistics, Sanskrit. And it was carrying the knowledge of India. That's why when you study yoga or you read the Upanishads, it's in Sanskrit. There is also a lot of wonderful literature in Persian. There's a lot in Pali and Prakrits, different vernaculars. But it has been carrying the core knowledge of Indian civilization. And you have an older form of Sanskrit. People often think it's one language. So there is the Vedic Sanskrit, which has a slightly different grammar, and it's slightly more archaic. And I find even more beautiful, it's more poetic. The Rig Veda, for example, is very deep, primordial poems set in a very precise meter that's almost hypnotic. That's why the chanting becomes, people get lost in the chanting because the meter, the rhythm, is called the oldest music, the Vedic chanting. And we'll listen to a little bit of it. And what happened with Sanskrit, and this is something that hasn't happened with other languages, is the grammar was frozen by Panini. So around 500 BC in Pakistan, today's Pakistan, there lived a scholar called Panini, and he said, well, this is going to be the grammar, and everyone took him as authoritative. It's like freezing a programming language and saying it's not going to change. And it has positives and negatives, and the positive is that I can take a text of 2 millennia ago. This morning I was reading some of the Charaka Samhita, Ayurvedic text. I can read something from a few hundred years ago, it will be exactly the same. There's no change. You cannot do that in English, absolutely not, or German or French, it's impossible. The geographical span is massive. This would be a 8-hour flight, you know, if you imagine it as a country, like say Russia. So we have, on the east of Iran, we have historical evidence of Sanskrit, and of course Iranian languages. Modern Iranian Persian is like, it is a Sanskritic language, basically. It's an Indo-European, Indo-Aryan, Iranian language, and very similar. I've read the Avesta, which is the Avestan language literature of the Zoroastrian religion, and that is in the same, it's using the same vocabulary as Vedic Sanskrit, basically. So if you know Vedic Sanskrit, you can unlock the key of Iran. So you wonder why there's conflict when, you know, people just dig a bit deeper and see the commonness that we're sharing. There's no need for the conflict, can very quickly blur in the world. And the eastern span is to Indonesia. You have coins also in the Philippines. So all of these countries have been influenced linguistically through writing, through the philosophy, through the culture, and through the stories, the mythology. And there's a very deep commonness between these regions. And this is where it fits in. Basically, you'll see Sanskrit is here. This is Indo-European. Now, scholars say there was a proto-language. It means a hypothetical reconstructed language before Sanskrit, but there's no records of it. that we have linguistically. We know that there was something before Sanskrit, but we don't know exactly what it looked like. And English, which we're speaking here, is in this same family. These are all the branches of Indo-European languages, which is why you'll see so much commonality. Even now when I'm speaking, I can think of Sanskrit roots. You know, virtually everything you're saying, you can link to a Sanskrit sound, and we'll see some of the links today. Here's the countries that speak Indo-European today in the world. As I said, it's almost half of the world. So Indo-European means English, German, most of the European languages except Finnish, Basque language, and Estonian, Hungarian. Just a few. There's a few odd languages that just don't fit in with the picture. They have other roots. So we were talking about the vastness of the literature. So the estimate was given. This was from a writing by Sheldon Pollock. He said that it's estimated there are 30 million extant manuscripts of Sanskrit literature. So if we stack this, we'd have a entire a row of manuscripts across India. Just to give you an idea of the scale of the literature. I mean, maybe everyone is familiar with some Sanskrit literature here. Maybe Patanjali's yoga literature, or you might have encountered the Vedas or Upanishads. But there are 30 million, think of it as 30 million Wikipedia pages, you know, and each of them is unique because it might be a commentary or a different author. It might be the same text, but there was a tradition of having different editions and different authors with different commentaries. So if we compare it to Greek and Latin, which is the basis of classics of Western civilization, it's 1,000 times of each of them, just to look at the scale. So it's something quite massive. And I like to look at things from many angles. Also, as a scholar, you get to do that. And here we have the economic influences. And what people often neglect to, for example, today Harvard is the #1 with it. It's got the largest fund of any university in the world. It's about $35 billion. This is the endowment fund, not even their budget. That's just what they have invested as endowments. And of course, they're producing a lot of Nobel Prize scholars and Pulitzer Prize and great scholarly, research. India was 40% of the GDP of the world. This is done by Angus Maddison, who's an economist from United Kingdom. And so 40% of the global GDP was in India. And this was the sort of golden age. So there was a very fertile period for the literature. And of course, there were different colonial periods. There was the Islamic period, and then there was the British period. And you can just see it slowly shrinking in terms of the India's economic, and now of course it's going to come back to 40%, we all know, in about 10 years. But of course everything is cyclical, but it's good to understand that India was peaking in terms of wealth and institutions, universities, and you'll see they had universities. So if you look at the universities in Europe, we have Bologna was the first European university, then Oxford came shortly after. And here we had a tradition in the pre-Christian era. We already, of course, Takshilal is where Charaka was famously the economist, who maybe you know the Niti Shastra. And of course, many of the Ayurvedic literatures are from this time. This was considered like one of the greatest universities of all time in the ancient world. It's unanimously, and each of them went through a rise and a fall, like any institution. We'll go through that. And of course, Nalanda is very famous. It was then destroyed in the one of the conquests around 1200. But what's important to know is that this very literary period was during a period where India had stability, they had wealth, they had very good rulers at times, and then there was this climate for producing incredible literary works, some of the greatest ever produced. So when the British got to India, William Jones was a judge in Bengal, and he had this very famous quote, maybe you're familiar with it. He said, "The Sanskrit language, whatever be its antiquity, is of a wonderful structure, more perfect than Greek, more copious than Latin, and more exquisitely refined than either, yet bearing a stronger affinity to both in the roots and the verbs that could not have been produced by chance, by accident. So he started to realize an incredible link between the European languages, like Greek and Latin, and then the Germanic, the other Indo-European languages. And here's some examples. If we take this, so we have roots, dhatus in Sanskrit. So vrt is the dhatu here, and pari is the upasarga, the prefix. So parivartate means to turn around. Maybe you all know about parikrama or circumambulation. Okay. So if you look in English, you've got this same root is there: vert, invert, divert, revert, convert, pervert, subvert. So this is what was noticed by linguists, and then they realized that this was the origin of it, basically. And this is, if we take another example, jnana, which is knowledge, and the root here, the dhatu. So that Sanskrit has approximately 2,000 roots that are solidified and crystallized. They're established. They're basically like constants. They don't change. So here's jna, and you'll see the Greek word gnosis, knowledge, know, ignorant, agnostic. So as you learn more and more Sanskrit, your understanding of English becomes much deeper. Take another example, mara. Here's the root mr, which is to die. Famous Mrityunjaya mantra. You know. Amrit is to not die, you know, to amrit. So here we have mort in Latin, and that very lovely word mortgage, which is till death. And of course in ancient India you just got given a house by the king if you were a Sanskrit scholar, so I don't have to think of a mortgage. Actually I was in Melkote with Lakshmi Tatacharya, a very great Pandit, and he said when the king of Mysore was there, if you were a Sanskrit scholar, you had house and maintenance for your lifetime. That was I'm not only Sanskrit, any teacher, you know, it was just a support for scholarly works. Murder, mortician, mortuary, mortify, mortal. So you can see the roots are flowing into our day-to-day language. Here's another one, star, stay, stand, establish, stable, stay. This is a Sanskrit root which means to fix something, like a starpati, you know, like the architect. And so one of the things, Sanskrit is an artificial language in the sense that it was engineered by sages or rishis. And one of the things that was done is to fix the phonology, that we have a very scientific way of pronouncing it. So much so that, say you were learning pronunciation, you made one error, you would have to usually go back and start the whole text again. It was incredible discipline. They saw even smallest errors as being quite severe. So they took it's called shiksha. It's basically one of the Vedangas, one of the things that you studied after or before the Vedas, depending on the tradition. And the shiksha solidified exactly how and where you pronounced anything. So this allowed us to preserve the phonology of the language. That means that when we read old Sanskrit literature, we know how it was pronounced. If we read old Greek or Latin, we aren't sure. We have to reconstruct it. And this is a very important and a beautiful thing. And you can be very proud about this if you're familiar with Sanskrit, because you can know that you're saying it correctly. There's no doubt in your mind. And there are 5 mouth positions, and we'll do a little exercise. So the first sound was up. It's the most natural and the easiest sound you can all make. So if you can just picture in your mouth, this is the back of your throat. This is guttural, basically. And then you have your soft palate, you have your hard palate, your back of your teeth, and your lips. Now if you just take ah, and I want everyone to just move it. So go ah, just move the ah into those 5 positions. So ah. So do you see that on the lips it gets to oo naturally, without you thinking what is an oo? This is how the vowels were created in Sanskrit. From ah, so ah moved to the soft palate and it becomes ah. It has to become an e sound. So it's still ah, but it's got a different mouth positioning. And all of the sounds in the Sanskrit phonology are in 5 positions, very precisely and very clearly delineated in the literature. This is how you pronounce it. So when it was taught, it was explained anatomically. This is where the sound is resonating. It's aspirated or unaspirated. It's voiced or unvoiced. And maybe we could do a separate seminar one day just on the phonology. This is a huge subject, but I wanted to just highlight that it's been preserved and it hasn't changed since the Vedic language and the classical Sanskrit. If we take English, if we go back to Old English 1,000 years ago, this is pa he pam huse genal hete he gehedre ponesweg a pait word. Modern English, when he got close to the house, he heard a band and a chorus. It's exactly the same. So you can see how you have lost information. This is called lossy compression in computer science. The Sanskrit is lossless because you're having a compressed language, but it is preserved exactly. And this is something very beautiful and very unique about Sanskrit. Here's the alphabet. We have 16 vowels and 33 consonants, so there are 49 sounds. This is in the classical. The Vedic spans slightly on that, and then the Vedic has something called accents. The swarita, the udata, and the anudata. That is the raised tone, where it's more like Japanese, where you sing the... That's why the Vedic is so melodic. You're singing it. The sounds are up and down. And you'll just see here, I've used the colors to illustrate the different mouth positions. So even your sibilant sha, sha, sa, ha. Maybe you're familiar with the alphabet, some of you. I, u, okay, I, o, ka, ka, ga, ga, nga. So you can see it is going through 5 positions. Ka, ka, ga, ga, nga. That's in 1 position. Cha, cha, ja, ja, nga. That's in the 2nd position. Ta, ta, da, da, na. 3rd position. Ta, ta. Now this is dental. You can actually feel danta, dental. Do you see the parallel between dental and danta? Danta is Sanskrit for the dental position. So phonology is actually a meditation in itself. When you just repeat the alphabet, you actually feel quite wonderful. And a big draw card for Sanskrit is that people feel a great enjoyment just reciting it. It's very melodic, it's very balanced, and it's a kind of yoga in the mouth. And that's another deep subject. So writing came quite late to India. Devanagari, which is the script that's used also for Hindi and many North Indian languages, that came around 700 AD. And it came from Nagari, and they all came from Brahmi. Brahmi was the first script that came to India, and we did a research on Brahmi. I'm going to share that with you. But this is the writing that you'd be familiar with today. And we made this poster for schools in India, and what it does is it's giving you a key of pronunciation that you can almost, without knowing the writing, you can just look at where it is to be pronounced in the 5 positions. We treat those 5 positions as the basis of the language. Devanagari, so anyone who's been to India will see Devanagari. In North India, in South you'll see Tamil, which is, all of the scripts came from Brahmi. Brahmi is the oldest script. No one exactly knows where Brahmi came from. There's a lot of hypothesis about that. Some say linked to the Indo script, some say from the Middle East, and others say it was an invention from India. So Brahmi is the oldest script, and we did this because we wanted people to remember this. And Brahmi was used in this whole region. You will still find Brahmic scripts, like Tibetan is a Brahmic script, Thai is a Brahmic script. You will find coins in the Philippines in the Brahmi script, and then you will find it from Afghanistan. So I like the fact that this was giving us a remembrance of this unity that was there by this common cultural thread. So we made a Brahmi poster, and we actually did it in our dictionary that you're going to see a bit later. The Indo script is, we're not sure if it's a script or not. It's still an unsolved mystery, if anyone likes to work on unsolved mysteries. I always joke if I meet a psychic, I say, okay, if you're perfectly psychic, tell me what was the Indo script, and then they go blank. I met like the famous German psychic, and she was on TV, and I said, well, okay, so if it's a perfect science and I'm not saying it's not, what was the Indo script? And then they say, well, I can't answer on that question. So if you want to test someone, just if they say that they're a psychic, just say, what was it? Because no one knows what it was. Some think it was seals, and some think it was a script. It's still, some say it was a Dravidian language, a South Indian, some say it was Sanskrit. Everyone has really been working on it. What we did is we worked with the team and we made a poster for schools. It's a huge 2-panel poster. I wanted the kids in India, and maybe worldwide, if South African kids want this too, to basically have it in the classroom, because it is firstly a mystery, and it's nice to have things that we haven't solved, like, you know, what was there before the Big Bang, and you know, can anything go faster than the speed of light? There are things that we still have, and this is one of the mysteries of humanity. So we made this 2-panel poster. We retraced all of these and we grouped them. You can see they're quite ideographic. Like, these look like people. You know, you would think, and these look kind of like fish and like fowl. And we put some other data, you know, about the frequency. So you can see some statistics, like the most frequent are in green. So you will see that this is number 21. That looks more like a gecko. Interesting. So we wanted kids to start to think about this in India, and hopefully in the next generation it will be solved or not. But this was one of our works in our institute that we did. And then we got permission, mostly from the British Museum, of the original seals. And this is the size. They're only 2.5 centimeters big. They're quite small. But this is one of the unsolved scripts, and it's possibly the mother of Brahmi. We don't know exactly how. Another thing about Sanskrit is that it's inflected. So basically, when you say for the man, you say naraya. So the noun carries basically the case inside of it, unlike in English where we would use for and the man, would use the articles and so forth. So it's an inflected language. It makes it quite challenging to work with. But it's one of its beauties is that it makes it quite scientific also in terms of deriving sentences. You have sort of very clear rules for working with the different nouns and the different genders, and it's quite rigid in that way. So it's inflected like Greek and Latin. There's a similarity there. Many ancient languages have that. English is not much inflected anymore. Very few, very little. This was something that I had no idea. I used to sit, because when I first got to India, I used to go and meet the greatest sort of Sanskrit, the traditions, and I would travel around and drive them crazy with all sorts of questions. And I used to sit with them and say, well, how many synonyms can you think of for like the sun? And they would roll off like 10 or 20. And then we worked with one of our AI teams, and we worked with the computational linguistics. And we actually took the dictionary data, we consolidated all of it, and we extracted synonyms based on the translations and then analysis. And we found out that there's much more than even the greatest pundits. So just like computers now beat us at chess and Go, they've now beaten us in Sanskrit synonyms. So if you take the word water, you have 227 words for water. I mean, it's just mind, expanding to think that there is a language like that. There are other languages with a lot of synonyms, but Sanskrit has a lot of synonyms for a lot of things, because it was a very poetic and very literary language. And you might know, like, you might know jalam, but there are hundreds of other ways to say water. If we look at the word love, 76, I think there's even more, but this was just from our script. And each is a different aspect or different type of love. So yeah, we touched on the scale of the manuscript tradition, the literature, and the number of works. I mean, you have works on elephant medicine, on horse medicine, Ayurveda for horses, and then, of course, architecture. And people are familiar with the yoga literature and the medical literature. Some of it, of course, Ayurvedic literature is very vast and very deep. There's the Brihatrayam, the big triad of Charaka, Sushruta, and Vagbhata, but then there's literally hundreds of other texts on specific aspects of Ayurveda, the different specializations. And these were some quotes. We'll just read one of them. So Sri Aurobindo said, the great mass of Sanskrit literature is a literature of human life, basically. On the literature, well, of course, we could talk at length just on the literature. And most people are familiar with maybe the Gita, to some degree. A lot of people read it. Gandhi used to read it every day. I took one of the children's literatures from the Panchatantra, and I just wanted to share with you that this basically, does anyone heard of the Panchatantra and the Hitopadesha? Of course, maybe outside of India you haven't, but you probably have indirectly heard of it because it's basically influenced Aesop's fables, Chaucer, and a lot of the storytelling that we had as kids has come from that. But we don't always link it back to the Panchatantra. And there's actually been conferences just on the Panchatantra. And these are the children's stories that we're told. They have a kind of moralistic children's stories, like teaching you right and wrong. They're about animals that can speak, so very Disney-esque, you know. And here's a quote by Edgerton. Before 1600 it existed in Greek, Latin, Spanish, Italian, German, English, Old Slavonic, Czech, and perhaps other Slavonic languages. It extended from Java to Iceland and has been worked over and over again, expanded, abstracted, turned into verse, retold in prose, translated to medieval and modern vernaculars. So this one literary work, just one text, the Panchatantra, was prolific throughout most of the world. There's just a kind of graph of how it came, and you have all these different versions in different languages, expanding and spreading. And one of the famous stories, I'll just tell it, is of the blue jackal. Just to give you an example of the literature, so it's a jackal that falls into the indigo vat. He's running away from a pack of dogs who are chasing him. And of course he comes out completely blue. All the other animals think he's like a super animal, don't recognize him as a jackal. So they start to worship him, and even the lion is bringing him food, they say in the story. And then there's different endings, but one of the endings is there's a full moon and all the other jackals are howling and he howls. And then the lion sees that he's not a god, and they gobble him up. And there's a moral in the story, you know, like basically don't leave your identity and your pack, you know, you can read into it. And this is just it's one of the stories. I mean, literature is a massive subject, so just to give, we did a study, and this took us a good few months. We just extracted from one Ayurvedic text how many fruits were eaten. How many fruits do you eat in a day? Maybe 5 to 10, or 15, or 8, you know. So we found 70 fruits that were commonly eaten. And this is mentioned in the Charaka Samhita as daily eaten. So you can imagine the diversity and the richness. And we have an illustrator making a poster of that. Of course, and Charaka listed them in terms of the medicinal value. Grapes was put first, then dates, then figs. And of course now they have clinics in France where you can go and just do therapies eating only grapes, you know. So here a few thousand years ago they figured out that grapes are super good for you. And everyone of course knows about wine, which is from grapes. That's another story. Okay. So Vedic chanting, we're going to listen to a little bit. Let's see. Just to give you an idea for those who haven't heard it. So it's just a tiny excerpt. So this is 3,500-year-old tradition of chanting, and UNESCO's recognized it as intangible cultural heritage. And they say it's the oldest music. You could hear there was a melody there, and it's quite hypnotic, the melodies, and it's also has a musical notation that was in the oral tradition, and then it was now in the manuscript tradition. So it's said to be, I think there's a quote here, contains notated melodies, probably the world's oldest surviving ones from the Encyclopedia of World Music. So it's very interesting. And this is Sanskrit theatre, just to give you an idea of, this is a 2,000-year-old theatre tradition, which I've seen in Kerala. It's still existing, you can go and see it. Kutiyatam. So these would be like epic plays. They usually were done in the temples in Kerala, and they're still preserved today. The UNESCO has also recognized them as intangible cultural heritage, and plays can be many, many days long. So it's good to know what's out there. So now I'm just going to walk you through what we've been doing with Sanskrit. That was just a very rapid, and maybe just I wanted to expose you to some of the aspects maybe you weren't familiar with, because people know that Sanskrit is fascinating and they know that it's beautiful, they enjoy chanting it, they know that yoga has that language as its basis, but when you work with the language as a scholar, you get many different appreciations for the language, and that's what I was showing. So our project, we wanted to do useful things with the language. The first thing I did was I wanted to make a meta dictionary. When you're studying, because it's such a vast subject, you need to take from many sources, and usually you would go to one dictionary and there'd be a little bit sort of clunky, the interface. So we made a very easy to use dictionary, which is live. There's actually about 80,000 people using it a month, and it's deeply appreciated. It's called dog fooding, because I was studying and I was making a dictionary in software. You know, you eat your own dog food, that's what they call it. I was basically using it and expanding it, enhancing it to accelerate my acquisition of the language, basically, so that I would. So it was constantly being tweaked, and it seems other people are using it. There's a lot of people using it, and it's live, and it's one of our main projects, and it's been deeply appreciated all around the world. So what we do is we search many different dictionaries, and there was something called the Shabdakosha tradition, which was the old dictionaries, like the Amara Kosha, which traditionally people would learn lists of synonyms. And we took the ancient dictionaries, and then also the modern ones done by Europeans, and also Indian scholars like Apte. He was a teacher in Pune, and MacDonald was an Indologist in England. And we basically consolidated all of them, and it's a bit like Google, taking from millions, needle in haystack. We try to give the most relevant info, and try to make it easy, because dictionaries are critical to learn a language. So this was what we did. What happened is we got 1 million words, unique words, in the dictionary by merging all these sources. And it just gives you an idea of the vastness, because if you put into perspective, the biggest Oxford, which is the one that you can't carry around in your school bag, is 228,000 words. This is 1 million words, and that's only version sort of 2 of the dictionary. We've still got a few more versions. We've still got more data to consolidate. We can only move in our parallel projects at a certain pace. So already it's a scale of 5 times as many words, and it gives you an idea of how big and vast the language is. The good news is you don't have to run away to know that there's 1 million words. Is if you know the 2,000 roots, you can unravel. It's like Lego. If you've got knowledge of the beginning blocks, you can build the space shuttle with Lego. So if you know the roots, you can build those, and the prefixes, you can get by and build those words, basically. The other thing we wanted to do is we wanted to make Sanskrit more accessible to people who don't know a primary language like English, German, or French, because all the dictionaries were in those languages. So we worked with Google Translate, so you can go from even Afrikaans. I can demonstrate this. If we had more time, I would walk you through and demonstrate these, but you can do it all yourself. It's all live. You can say take dochter and you'll get the Sanskrit for daughter, basically. And this was a year or so back that this slide was made, but it's now about 80,000, and it's more countries. So you can see the interest in Sanskrit is global. It's not a niche subject. It's something that people are interested in. And I think it's spread with yoga, very much so. And then just like sort of the doorway for me to Sanskrit was through Ayurveda. I think yoga, a lot of people in my university were studying yoga at the same time, and then they wanted to understand the Yoga Sutrani deeper. So I'm going to jump a bit, because so some of these are more specific to more technical. One of the things we did, and this I did for the World Sanskrit Conference in Bangkok, we presented it, is we taught a computer how to speak Sanskrit, basically. So you'll see there's a little audio icon there, and what's happening here is we train the computer on the rules of the phonology. Just like I said, there's very precise rules. And if the audio is going out, you should hear it. Right? Is there? I'm not sure if it's on the mixer.
Padma.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So you could hear this lovely lady said Padma, and this word Padma Banda.
Padma Banda.
So this is not a recording. This is a computer that's learned to read and then pronounce Sanskrit, basically. Even a more complicated word here. It's called
Padma Kalyana Khanda.
So it's quite good for people.
Padma Karnika.
Padma Karnika. People who don't have a teacher handy, they can go onto our dictionary. It's still in beta because it's 99.9% perfect. It can make errors, but shouldn't.
Padma Lekha.
Padma Lekha. So she's pronouncing it as good as any teacher would pronounce it. And this is something we made, and it's been appreciated by people who, they don't know how to pronounce a word, or they're having a debate about pronouncing words. So we taught a computer. The reason we did that is it hadn't been done. One of the IITs had tried to do it, and then the web page was broken, it was shelved. A lot of the time in India there'll be a grant from the government, and it's not necessarily in the public domain, or the tool was made, a paper was written, and then it just gets shelved. I think it was one of the institutes in Bangalore had said they'd done it. We contacted them because we don't like to duplicate things that are already done. And then we got no response, so we just built this with the German AI Institute. So it was a lot of fun. And then I showed you earlier about the synonyms. So here's, the Swahili word Simba, like Simba chips. Everyone knows in South Africa, Simba. So that's from Simha, lion is Simha. But there's 89 words for lion. Now, I mean, that's phenomenal as for a language to have that. So what we did in this one tool that we built, we call it our word across languages, is we show the synonyms in Sanskrit, and then we show in all the world languages that we could use, we could get access to, and you can start to see links, like if you see this word stand, this is the verb, the root, and you'll see standa in Icelandic, and you'll see that sound will come there. Here in Kazakh it's there, in stojalo, that sound is constant. So it's a linguistic tool that we made. And a very interesting one I like to share with people is, I have a friend from Iceland, and he always told me about this one. Icelandic is samband for relationship, and in Sanskrit it's sambandha. So Iceland was an island, it got the Indo-European language, it got the Sanskrit derived language, and then it never got much outside influence. So they kept the word. So this tool, this is a live tool. Maybe you guys could suggest a noun, like any noun, and we'll do an example. I'll just show you. Maybe just a thing. Someone come up with a thing.
Fire.
Fire. Okay, that's quite an interesting one. So 248 words. Of course, whole Rig Veda's Agni Mile Purohitam. They like fire. It's the first word in Sanskrit. But 248 words for fire. I mean, it's quite something. I'm impressed. Overwhelmed, I think, is probably a better word. Yeah. So this is a tool we built, and it's quite an interesting process to look at it from the perspective. We also built a root explorer. The roots basically expand into the language. So we made a tool where you could take a root sound, and this is quite interesting. To play with. Remember I was saying like stand, stay, establish, stare. Is that so? If you take that star root, and you go in this root explorer, and you see all the words that have formed from it. You'll see in Sanskrit, you can see them, and if you go over there, you will basically see the meaning, stationary, standing. So English and Sanskrit are virtually like cousins in this example I'm giving you, and I can give you many more. These are all words that have, in the dictionary, that have come from that root, basically. There's a whole literature called Nirukta, which goes into the origin of words. It's very philosophical, because a lot of it blurs, and you can't say exactly where words come from. It's not like this is, if we say, we have etymology and we know where words come from, we can't always say exactly scientifically for every word, but the author of the Nirukta is saying that every word is coming from a root, basically. But it hasn't been exactly proven, but it's a theory, basically, at this stage. And most words, I would say, absolutely come from roots. Okay. So that was our root explorer that we made. And I was briefly telling you about Brahmi and that we thought it was very important. And we just made it, we worked with the web font consortium just to get Brahmi that we could show it in the browsers. So we just thought it'd be nice, even though very few people are going to use it, it's just representative of a link with the past. And I explained the reason, because it was this common script through this entire region. I was working on a conversational Sanskrit project to try and rapidly help people to converse in Sanskrit. There are still cities in India, like Pune, Pondicherry, Varanasi, where people still get together and they speak in Sanskrit, and they basically use it as their social language. And I wanted to develop on this. So we built a word frequency tool, texts, and then of course, the most common word was and, and then, this and not, and things like only, and me, and like, words like light. It's very similar to English. But what was nice in this tool is if you want to see what are the most common words just by an author, Patanjali, or let's say you want to just see in the Vedic literature, and you'll start to see things like Soma, Marut, Agni. You'll see, okay, so there's of course and is going to always be a very popular word, but you'll start to see that bu, to exist, the verb, sarva, that's very common in the Vedas, and you'll start to see things that like Atman, the idea of Atman, is already the 30th most popular lemma in the Vedic literature. So this was another tool that we made and we gifted to the world for Sanskrit. We worked with the WordNet, and this was a collaboration also, and we just made it available in our dictionary. So you have a WordNet. There's a very famous WordNet for English, so we thought we should link in the data. The data was done by a IIT in India, and we just linked it in. This is one of our newer works. It was also back and forth with the AI scientist Ashok Popat at Google, because I wasn't happy with the output for working with Sanskrit literature with for optical character recognition, because there's a lot of literature to be digitized. So rather than invent the wheel, we worked with Ashok and we gave them some feedback and examples, and we built a tool with the Google platform, so you could take a printed or handwritten Sanskrit text. If we just take an example here, what this is doing is, this is just a story, and it's going to convert it into Unicode, and it's very accurate. You don't have to check it, but so this is, you can see it's being used quite actively. It's 274,000 documents already been done, and quite a lot of words. I think it's 68 million words already recognized. So this is an OCR tool for digitizing Sanskrit literature. It's part of a bigger project we're working on to try to tame and make a platform similar to how Wikipedia is tamed, you could say, encyclopedic knowledge. We wanted to have one consolidated platform of all the extant Sanskrit literature, which is something that we're working on. It's called Sanskrit Archive. We made a game for learning Sandhi. I won't get too much of it. We did some games. And one of the things, I wasn't happy with the speed that you could type Sanskrit. There were all sorts of variegated systems that other people had tried. I went to a conference in Bangalore on the Sanskrit book fair, and people had tried a keyboard that went e, o, and this is the Indian government one that's used in some government offices for typing Devanagari. But I wasn't happy with them because everyone's already learned QWERTY, mostly, not the French and the Germans, but the rest of the world is using QWERTY. Or other countries don't use it, but most of the world is using QWERTY. So we wanted something that would work rapidly. So we made an intuitive system where you type the diacritical. Sanskrit has a Romanized Sanskrit where there's a diacritical mark, like this is R, so it has a line. So you turn on the Sanskrit writer mode and then you type the diacritics, you draw it in your mind from top to bottom, and then it would output the Sanskrit. So what this did is it allowed people to, in about 1 minute, be able to touch type Sanskrit before they would have to learn a new system. This was also one of our gifts. We did it on PC and Mac, and then we built a dictionary for it. And this software is free. You can get it on the Apple Store. It's used by a lot of people who want to write letters, maybe spies also, they want to not be decrypted. And, well, not really. But the thing is, it's used by a lot of people to type in Sanskrit at the moment. And in my university studies, I was going deeper into Panini. He was the first grammarian. And then we made a kind of programmer's reference, like a computer program reference, to the Ashtadhyayi, which is the Panini 4,000 sutras. And it has like the pronunciation of Pandits are chanting them. This is traditionally you would learn the text just through memorization. And we consolidated references. We got permission, whatever was in the public domain, or if it was in copyright, we took permission, and we made it like a kind of programmer's reference, you know, to Panini. Because what Panini did is he gave 4,000 odd rules and 2,000 roots, and then you render the language with the rules and the roots. You basically create the language. You would make a word. There's a whole lot of steps that it goes through. It's a bit like a programming language, but running in your brain as the computer. And that's why there's been a lot of links between the early history of computers with Babbage and Boole and Boolean logic and different logical operations, and sort of giving credit to Panini's contribution, because there was a lot of pioneering in operational functions, basically, where you take something and you convert it into something else using different rules, which is really what computers are doing all the time. So this was called the Panini Research Tool. It's also been used by quite a few universities now as part of their curriculum. I'll skip that one. Yeah, we did a series of posters. I'm going to go a bit quickly through them because then we'll have time for Q&A. We did, I'll just stop on the Greek one. So Greek and Sanskrit are pretty close. You'll see here like Panchan, 5, Pente, Pate, Pitur, you know, father, Okte, Ashtan, Triya, 3. So if you've learned Old Greek and you've learned Sanskrit, you basically you can exchange the two in most cases. We did a poster because I wanted people to reconnect that bridge. There was, in this sort of Christianization of knowledge, there was a kind of attempt to sort of break, because the Christian Bible is in Old Greek, to sort of break that link from India. And I think we should realize that, you know, languages don't break links. It's like animals just wander over a border, and languages just wander over borders. They don't see division, basically. So when I did a year of Old Greek studies, it was very close to Sanskrit and wonderful to see. We've been working on the 64 arts. This is interesting because we just got support to do a school in Oroville for the 64 arts, and that should be coming in the next few years. 64 arts was the old educational paradigm, and it was a metaphor for very comprehensive, very deep studies, basically, and particularly focusing on arts and sciences like we do today. But it was quite deep, and also a lot of the forgotten things that we're sort of losing in the iPad generation, like needlework and doing column and decorations, rangoli, learning to prepare home remedies. A lot of these things are getting lost. We're actually going to go through an extinction period, I think, because everything is moving towards digital. In Oroville, we recently had an endangered craft mela, where we had about 30 or 40 crafts of India, because they were endangered of being lost, like pottery and so forth. Plastic is obviously... so this is the poster we did of the 64 arts. And our major magnum opus work that we're in progress now is the Sanskrit Archive. This is basically, we want to try, and I met with the head of the Wikimedia, the CEO of Wikimedia Foundation, and I'm collaborating with some people at Google, trying to get their support, because we need that level of support to do it, because it's a very vast and complicated. It needs AI and it needs crowdsourcing like Wikipedia is using. So this is something I'm working on in the next few years. It's our main work. So it's our moonshot, you could say. It has been attempted, but no one has succeeded. There's been fragmented bits and pieces, like just in Buddhist literature, and Tibetan institutes have sponsored some Sanskrit literature for Buddhists and so forth, but nothing is done for the entirety of the Sanskrit literature. For those who want to study further, I recommend Australia National University, where I did my studies. There is a free EPUB book. It's a year's study, and it comes with a iPad software that you can use, and American Sanskrit Institute, and in Cape Town School of Practical Philosophy, and maybe we can also have some workshops here someday. Be great at the Consulate. That's the. So we'll move over to questions now. Thank you.
How available is the Sanskrit?
Everything, yeah, is available.
It's available, right?
It's available in use,
like
right?
As an app?
Oh,
Or
they're all
web-based.
Web-based, yeah. Because but they're available. Everything that I shared and more, much more, is available.
Are you also?
Sorry.
What's the thing that you tell?
Oh, okay. You can go to sanskritdictionary.com is the main site, or you can go to our institute, Sanskrit Research Institute. You can just look up Sanskrit Research Institute, and then from that website you can get to all of these. So we're not teaching Sanskrit, we're giving tools to aid the learning of Sanskrit. For teaching, actually, the 3 courses that I recommended are more than adequate. Like pedagogy has been done well already, so there's no need to teach Sanskrit, because a lot of people are teaching it very well. There's many institutions teaching it. Theosophical Society in South Africa also, I did one of their courses years ago. They teach it beautifully. That was the Shantananda Saraswati tradition. You can actually ask them if you get a group together. They have really good teachers, and that's a very good primer, and then, well, it would be nice. I'm working with UCT at the moment on the Khoi and San languages, so maybe we will do some courses there at some stage at UCT. It would be very nice.
The Chimay edition, they also teach.
Yes. Yes, they teach, yes. Ananda, they're not there. Ananda Kuchir, okay, yes, Chimay. Okay, great. Sorry, Abhishek.
Are you also developing an app, or is it in the pipeline?
You mean an app for the dictionary?
Yes.
So, the app will be for conversational Sanskrit, because usually when you're using the dictionary, you're usually working on a translation or you're writing something yourself. It's not, the dictionary will work on a mobile, but app is in the cards, basically. We would do that, yeah. People have requested that. It's not because mostly people are working on their computer at the time. They're not really mobile. But for conversational Sanskrit, we have a project this year that will be an app, because we want to try a new way to allow people to learn Sanskrit quicker by using the frequencies. So you just learn the most frequency words first, and then the next most frequent. So you only need about 2,000 words to navigate in a language as basics, like to speak a basic conversation. So I want to encourage like there was a revival of Hebrew. It was a liturgical language, and they they brought it back as a modern language. So they've created a simplified version, and I think the same should happen with Sanskrit. The Sanskrit of the literature is very complicated as a spoken language. It can be spoken, but you have to really be on your toes. So I thought it would be nice to have a simplified, like a modern simplified or standardized Sanskrit. So we're planning an app which would allow people to converse easily. We've done that as a Mac software, and that will be moved to iOS and then probably to Android next. Sure. Hi.
Me?
Yeah, sure.
If I'm not mistaken, you said that grammatics of Sanskrit is frozen now, right?
Yes.
For many
classical Sanskrit.
Classical
Yeah.
Sanskrit, for many centuries. But what about the wording of Sanskrit? I mean, for example, in English and in many other languages, the new words appear. For example,
Yes.
I don't know, for example, self.
Yes.
So is it possible to construct a new word in Sanskrit?
So you can construct infinitely new words because it's agglutinative. So you can take prefixes and roots, multiple prefixes and roots, and create new words constantly. So there are the grammar was frozen, and the reason you're seeing so many synonyms is so many authors had created new words. The words weren't created by Panini. He just gave the rules, and then each poet would then take a different figurative way of saying something. Like in the synonyms for lion, one of the synonyms is king of the jungle, or feared by the deer. Literally feared. So we just say lion. It doesn't tell us anything about a lion. We just have to remember the picture of lion. But in Sanskrit, it will be feared by the deer. It's a samasa, a compound. So you create new words by describing something. Like yoga is coming from the root yuj, to join, enjoin, basically, unite. So it has a meaning. It's not just a sound that we memorize. There's that root is there, yuj. Yoga would be ununite, to disunite. So yeah, there's new words, and there's a modern Samskrita Bharati. They're doing conversation, and they go like Duravani for telephone and so forth. They create new words. Yeah.
What is computer in Sanskrit?
Sanganaka, yeah, like they would. I mean, I can make up words because you think computer, So you could create a word just by knowing the prefixes and the roots. We could make a word if we know what computer means. If it's just an abstract thing that we don't know, but we know then we can describe what a computer does. But we could make a few hundred words for computer. We could say, for example, the way you'd make a word is best chess player could be a word for computer. So, because a poet would say best chess player, because we know computers are the best chess players. They beat humans like a long time ago. Big Deep Blue, I think, was it. So you would create that, and chess was, of course, from a Sanskrit originated game. There was a Chaturanga, I think it was. Yeah.
You mentioned koi in Sanskrit. Is there a connection?
So the indigenous languages of the Western Cape are the like Nama language and the Khoisan group of languages. They're a little bit different. The ones with the clicks, where the clicks came into the bunch of languages. There are long shots, but I don't think there's much research done. Like there are definitely words that came to Africa from Sanskrit through trading. Definitely Ethiopia. The Khoi people, even their dialects are very different. So Khoi, like you could say words like Kalahari sound like Sanskrit, very much so. And but I'm not expert enough to see a strong link. And it would be unlikely. It's like saying Aboriginal languages of Australia, could they be linked to Sanskrit? Although there are some people who link Aboriginal Australian languages to Dravidian languages, the Tamil, Kannada, and Malayalam languages, so forth. So, but I'm not sure if there's a direct link. It's not an Indo-European language. It's the Khoisan languages, and they're very different. And they're very ancient. They're also very significant. And some of them have gone extinct also. Some of the languages are lost. Yeah, sure.
First, this is like, what is the reason behind?
That was just like a golden egg and a spiral, basically. Yeah.
So
it was from.
Because out of lots of, you can do something different. But
it was abstract. So it was that the golden egg basically, and in the mythology, it was just taking like ideas from the mythology, and then the spiral was just going into a center point. It was just a icon basically.
Like Indian tradition, it was you're sitting before the guru and you learn the things.
Yeah.
It was a tradition basically.
Yeah.
Gurukula.
Yeah.
But now, like the way you are teaching the languages, now not only you but many softwares are there, and there are many programs, software programs. So do you feel like that there are pitfalls learning not directly from the guru but from the technologies?
Yeah, there have been. So the traditional pedagogy of Sanskrit is very beautiful, but And it takes time. The tradition is still alive in India in the Gurukuls. So Panini is still being taught. You know, the different Laghu Siddhanta and the Siddhanta Kaumudi. There's traditions like the Swami Dayananda Saraswati in his ashram. I was in touch with a scholar. They're still teaching. Nothing has changed. And you know, there's traditionalists in anything. You know, let's say aviation. You could be a traditionalist and fly a biplane, you know, propeller driven, or you could have a rocket, you know. And it's not that a rocket is better or worse, it's just faster, you know. So modern pedagogy for language, because the brain, we've understood neuroscience a bit better now, so we know how the brain acquires a language. There's certain things that have to happen. So there is a scientific approach to learning language. The traditional method is very beautiful, and in my degree we did a lot of chanting and subhashitas. So my professor tried to keep one foot in the tradition and one foot in the sort of intellect and scholarly side. But I've seen a lot of, particularly people come to India and they try the traditional studies and they don't persist because it takes time and you have to be in one place for a long, long time. Whereas with digital education, you can be on a yacht and studying. I think you need a bit of both. You need to understand. I mean, I spent a year working deeply on Panini. You really need to understand the tradition. You need to understand its value. But you shouldn't necessarily be blindly following any system. You should follow what works, basically. The tradition can work for some people. There was like George Cardona. He's the greatest Western grammarian. He studied with the traditional guru in Varanasi, but then he also had professors in the West. So he had one, Ramanath Sharma also. He was with his father, who was a traditionalist, and then he was in the US with linguistics. So I think it's good to it's like allopathy with Ayurveda is much better than just allopathy or just Ayurveda, because your Vidya is not going to be that good for a heart attack. They might or might not, but you don't want to take a chance. You'd rather have a cardiologist who could put a stent in and basically, put an emergency pacemaker or whatever's needed. So I think, but Ayurveda will definitely help you prevent getting the heart attack by good nutrition, lifestyle, routine, seasonal, daily routine. So you want to take tradition and modern science in between. That's what I try to do. I hope that answers the question. So yeah, I mean, traditionalists is always going to be pro-tradition, and they're going to say that's the only way to learn, because that's their scope. So it's better to learn both and then decide, basically. Sure.
In modern era, when the business language and international language is English, what are your opinion about the motivation of learning Sanskrit? How is the motivation?
To learn it? So you're saying, well, English is the de facto language at the moment.
Apart from literature.
I mean, there are people learning it every day. Like in Germany, Sanskrit studies at university are growing. It's booming. There was an article recently about it. A lot of people want to learn to chant in Sanskrit and then also to translate literature themselves. A lot of people just love it. Like for me, I just love the sound of it. I was also musical before, so there's a musicality in Sanskrit. And some people do, like Krishna Das or the bhajans and the kirtanam, the ISKCON and Art of Living. They will spend hours chanting, a few Sanskrit words. So, of course, you could argue that could be Greek or Persian words. It doesn't have to be Sanskrit. Because in the last lecture I gave, someone said there was research on the neuroscience and Sanskrit affecting the brain. And my counter-argument, and of course I would say that it definitely affects the brain in a positive way, but we don't know that Gregorian chants don't do the same thing. We have to do a comparative study. And I would imagine Gregorian chants do something similar, maybe not exactly the same. Yeah, so I think people, once you have the desire, then you just find a path. There's Duolingo now, people use to learn Spanish or French. So we try to make tools like that, for... the challenge with Sanskrit is you can't go to India and speak Sanskrit. I wish you could. There are 3 isolated villages where they've revived spoken Sanskrit. It's more like a touristic sort of revival. It's not an ancient tradition. And then there's scholarly families that still, like we did a ceremony for the 50th birthday of Oroville, and the pundits came from all over, some from North India, some from west, from Goa, Konkan, and some from south. And they all spoke in Sanskrit, and I spoke to all of them in Sanskrit, in broken Sanskrit, because I'm not speaking it every day. So if you want to speak, and if you go to Sringeri, there's a gathering once a year. You can just go and speak in Sanskrit. They have so you can, the beauty of India is you can find places, and I would like to see Sanskrit revived in India. I mean, I like what Israel did with Hebrew. The reason is that, well, I guess there's many arguments for and against in India, and I think they had the chance, to do it, and maybe they missed the chance, and then there's, maybe some people thought it would leave out certain groups and so forth. But I think there is a growth of interest in Sanskrit worldwide. I mean, if you see with our dictionary, 80,000 people use it a month, and we never announced it, we never marketed it, we just put it out there, and it was useful. And then it's just word of mouth, like a good restaurant. If you open a good South Indian dosa, there's no good South Indian in Cape Town, but if you were to open a good idli dosa vadai place, you wouldn't need to do any marketing. If it's really like authentic South Indian, if those of you have eaten like proper fresh idli, maybe someone will do it in the audience. I like North Indian food also. Yeah, sure. Any more questions? Prashna?
How did the different dialects of Sanskrit origin?
Dialects? No, they are. So they aren't really dialects. They're vernaculars. Like Hindi is like a derived language from Sanskrit. Sanskrit itself, there's very slight differences in the way that it's pronounced. In the Pandits, there was a survey done by a Fulbright scholar where he went and he recorded all the pronunciation in Varanasi, in Pune, and South India. There's slight differences, but it's 99.99% the same. There's not really dialects like that. It's either pronounced perfectly or you're making an error. There's no grey areas with pronunciation. And then there's derived languages from Sanskrit. Those like vernaculars, like Hindi is an example, and the predecessors of Hindi, Gujarati, Bengali, Marathi.
So the initial Sanskrit language would be Vedic.
Vedic is the oldest form of Sanskrit. Then there's something between Vedic and classical where they're kind of blurry, and then there is classical, which is from 500 BC onwards, and hasn't changed.
So there's nothing prior to the Vedic Sanskrit?
There is always language prior. I mean, there's the whole history of language which goes into evolution of man and our brain and our development of our brain, the growth of the brain, the frontal part of the brain where we have language. That's a very deep subject, and because as a scientist you can only base on what you can, historicity of something. So before Vedic we can say there is, like Panini mentions, like when Panini wrote down the grammar, he said he made it out like this is just like version 50. There were like 49 versions coming before him, but that was all lost. So it was either lost because it wasn't as good. It's like the Volkswagen Beetle, everyone had one because it was the good one. They forgot about the previous models. Or there was, we had the eruption of Santorini. You had massive events in the world that changed us, dramatic events, big volcanoes and drying ups of rivers. And so you've got to fuse a lot of sciences to understand. But we know that the Vedic is the oldest, it's the oldest continually used language that I'm aware of in the world. In its original, it's still used. Like the chanting you heard is from 1500 BC. And it's the only language from that time we know exactly how it was pronounced. Another one, sorry.
At what point did that language sort of lull down to the point that it resurged again? Would you be able to indicate what brought that about?
Which language? The
Sanskrit.
When you say lull down, you mean?
Maybe it's my ignorance that I never heard much of it, but I know in the ancient times they used to.
Oh, you mean, okay. Why was there a resurgence of interest?
And
so,
at which point did it just, what brought that, maybe death, maybe that's the incorrect word.
So when the Europeans discovered, inverted commas, Sanskrit, of course they knew because the Greeks were going to India all the time, and Africa had contact. There was contact from the Middle East and Africa, constantly trading. But there was the rediscovery, and then there was this sort of development of linguistics, and then it became studied very deeply. The analogy is if you go to Oxford University, there was a whole building for studying India and Sanskrit, and it's changed its purpose now. Now there's just like a room like maybe this size for Sanskrit, but initially it was a massive. When the British were very interested in translating the literature. There were obviously other agendas, like they wanted to learn Sanskrit to translate the New Testament into Sanskrit to convert Indians to Christianity. There was these parallel agendas, but then there were also very good agendas to really discover the culture. Any of the colonial rulers who were open-minded, they fell in love with the culture. If they were closed-minded, and like Macaulay is the famous closed-minded, he thought it was like useless, you know, the value. I mean, he just showed himself to be a fool by the statement he made. He said it's like, it's not worth anything, the knowledge written in Sanskrit. But he never read anything, he never knew. He was the one who changed into English medium education. That's why everyone speaks such perfect English in India today. You know. There was Persian medium and Sanskrit medium education was also there. Then under different India, it was moving the history. It wasn't. There would be a war, and then it would go from Hinduism to Islam, like rules. It wasn't like static. And we're talking about a vast period of time. But there was definitely. So if you look at the old universities that I mentioned, they were studying in Sanskrit because the literature was, the textbooks were in Sanskrit. Like now, you'd go to UCT and study in English, and Stellenbosch in Afrikaans or English. And then maybe you had your vernacular for the lectures, but your textbooks were actually in Sanskrit. And maybe the lectures were given in Sanskrit because we know from the commentaries and the commentaries on commentaries, we know that there was incredible scholarly, like there is today a scholarly tradition in English. If you go to a conference I just went to the AI conference in Cape Town. There was the Africa AI conference. It was all in English. It wasn't in Dutch or German or French. So English is the de facto language today. Sanskrit was, for that part of the world, it was the de facto language. It was the scholarly and literary language. So I don't think there was a decline in India other than when India was under colonial rule. So there was the Islamic Conquest, which, you know, some scholars say that it popped up or popped down depending on who was in charge. And there's a lot of debate. You know, some say it was all bad, some say it was really good. And there was a lot of debate and discourse, and it's hard to get a clear picture, but I can say that it was sometimes, like any colonial rule is not going to be always positive for what was there before, you could say, like that's almost a fact. And if you look at America, you know, there was native civilization in America, Hopi and so forth, and it's very, very weak theme. And the Khoi and the San in South Africa also, they were the Indigenous in the Western Cape. You don't see a very strong linguistic and so forth theme. But Sanskrit, because it was so prolific, managed to survive. And the Tibetans would store a lot of the literature. Now they've found manuscripts in Tibet. There's Sanskrit manuscripts that were stored there because the climate's so good for storing manuscripts. And India's vast, and the conquests weren't just overnight, because it wasn't like a modern war. It was slowly, a little bit here, a little bit there. Like parts of Rajasthan were, you know, happily under the Hindu rulers, you know, for long periods. So it's now we have contemporary communication and we have like this globalization. So now obviously things like yoga, there's a World Yoga Day from Narendra Modi has created that. So now these things are just spreading like wildfire. I read that Japan is like now the fastest adoption of yoga in the world. Like I have a friend studying that, and he's at Kyoto University. He's doing a study on why, you know. It's like they've gone berserk for yoga in Japan. And yoga is another whole subject, because there's a lot of misconceptions about yoga also, and once you start to read the literature, you can get to the root of yoga and where it really comes from. Because, yeah, there's different traditions and different ways of... But what we do know is that search for oneness and that search for a deeper sense of purpose and a search for an inner quest has been there since the beginning of the literature. The Rig Veda, like you have quotes in the Vedas about beingness and about the self and about oneness, you know, and about unity. So those thoughts are super, super ancient.
This question comes from this.
Sorry, okay. Yeah, sure.
Because, you know, I was thinking, and there has been research somewhere, that when you learn this language Sanskrit, then you change in the personality also. You can,
Yeah.
So this is there, like, have you encountered this?
I mean, I cannot see any negative. It's been very positive. It's a lifetime of work that I would do with it. I mean, I have other fields that I work with music. I'm interested now in further studies with music and computer science. Before Sanskrit, I still have a deep love for that. And but definitely for personal. I mean, that's why the St. James schools adopted it, because they saw that it helps to develop the children very deeply. So they actually teach Sanskrit to all the kids. Like, I don't know if anyone knows about St. James schools, but you can read about them. They've developed the O levels and A levels for Sanskrit, and we've worked with a few of the teachers. It's called St. James Education, and they have excellent textbooks for Sanskrit. And I know when Narendra Modi came to Ireland, they received him at the St. James School, and they chanted this shlokas for him, subhashitas. So, sure.
A silly question, but it's going to give me my next this evening. What's the correlation between Panini and Italian language?
Between?
What's the correlation?
Panini and
Italian language?
Oh no, there's no link. No. No. Panini is a patronym from the word pani. It means like son of shopkeeper, if not mistaken, like someone his dad was a shopkeeper. Which might be like there's a lot of humor in the naming of things. Like Charaka means one who roams around and moves, doesn't stop. So it's a metaphor for, if you really, I studied Ayurveda very deeply because I had deep love of medicine, and I just roamed around. I was in the Himalayas, in Sri Lanka, in Tibet, in Nepal. So I could relate to that metaphor. And it could be like a joke that there wasn't really a human called Panini. It was just like they're saying that because it's the opposite of a shopkeeper's son. Because Panini was like super genius. Like we're talking about Stephen Hawking's level of IQ. There's no doubt. I mean, anyone even on super intelligence is going to struggle with Panini. It's very complicated logic. So saying I'm the son of a shopkeeper is almost like a kind of joke, like, and then it's like the professor disguising himself as a beggar. So there's a lot of, and that's also one, you fall in love with that kind of humor that's built into the sushruta, like well heard, So, if you want to be a good doctor, you've got to be able to listen well, and you've got to hear things properly. You also have to listen to the patient's voice, You can hear the state of the doshas from their voice, basically. There's some Vaidyas who diagnose just from the voice, like if the patient is sick or not.
Because didn't Panini also, at the same time as the language, laid down a sort of spiritual how to meditate?
Panini was Vyakarana, grammar. So there's 6 Vedangas. Panini, you think of Patanjali, maybe? Patanjali, spiritual is everyone. Like from the Rig Veda, so all the Upanishads, that's like the Upanishads, and everything is basically dealing with, India's always been, I think that's the thing, anyone who visits India, you feel it's like there's something very deeper, a deeper quest of life, like a deeper understanding, philosophy, and it's not like there's concordance, like Buddhism, there's some that say there is no soul, and then Advaita will say there's oneness in everything, and you have to reach that supreme oneness. And so it's not like they always agree. And then the Vaishnava will say everything is Vishnu, and the Shaivism will say it's Shiva. And then you will have the Aghoris who will say that drop every conception and basically like break every boundary, shatter every misconception and just drop everything that you think exists. So they can't all be right, as Richard Dawkins says. You can't have everything being right, but you can have multiple philosophies that are beneficial, basically. And then everyone has to kind of unravel it by themselves. That's the beauty of yoga, It's like a very individual thing. You experience it through your reality, That's what's called ahamkara.
So they were all actually specialists in grammar at the time.
Oh yeah.
When you look back and read any of those ancient texts,
yes,
the grammar is more significant.
Everyone did 12 years of grammar, black belts. Like there was no one, if you weren't black belt grammar, you couldn't You weren't taken seriously, and the scholarly tradition was very traditional, so it was very orthodox, and either you were they would see someone who doesn't know their stuff instantly. Like if I'm with great grammarians like Ramanath Sharma, they can see that I'm not. I mean, I know the grammar, but I'm not on that level. You can. It's like a judo master will know the level of his opponent, so you can get to that level. I mean, there's Western scholars who haven't gone through the tradition who are like George Cardona. He is black belt also. You can get to black belt through many ways. You don't have to go to the traditional studies, the tatami mats and so forth.
So that is one of the bases in which a philosophy was actually accepted or not.
Well, it was a Vedanga, so you learn. It was like
you had to sort of debate and sort of.
You had to learn grammar. So now we go to school, we do maths, English, and biology and physics. The Vedangas were like that. You did phonology. Astrology was also a Vedanga. And Vyakarana
was there a big difference between the spoken Sanskrit and Hindi?
High Hindi, like a very educated and proper Hindi would be the most close. But there is a difference. Like Hindi drops the A, the final A off a word. Like they'll go yog, not yoga. But you'll get
something with their right hand,
right,
and holding with their left hand. It's just then, if I come to think about it, then I would tell them you have some Hindu tradition within you.
It might have come from Africa to India. We don't know, because a lot of things did come from Africa and then went out and then have come back.
There's a literature on that.
Yeah.
From a Kenyan author.
Yeah.
He was here for the World Hindu Conference. The
similarities, yeah. Yes, Ethiopia has a very, the kings of Ethiopia and the kings of India at the time, there's a lot of documented history. You can read up on that. So that would be where to look. You would look in East Africa because it's proximal to India. I think there was one question at the back there.
Yeah, just on what you're saying about multiple philosophies, doesn't that speak, so where does the language influence culture and culture influence language? Because obviously within all of these philosophies, it means that there's a space for an alternative thought.
Yes.
It weren't just a group of people, just like you're saying at Oracle. It's not just a group of people that, there's not, because if you look at the language and the way they speak, like even their opening prayer, it's like a collective. Is the and I word. So how much does that play?
So what happened is, because you saw with Chaucer and Shakespeare how the language had changed. So when you were born in India, in these traditions, you could access such a long history of your tradition unbrokenly. So it's almost like a snowball effect. Whereas, let's say, okay, English literature, of course, now we have the internet, so you can get from the best to the worst. If you're, say, a child, you can go have Roald Dahl, or you can read Rowling, or Harry Potter, or go to Panchatantra. Now you don't even need a library. But the tradition was cumulative, and there was, firstly, India was very wealthy and very established as a civilization, and had a very old civilization, a very mature, urbanized civilization. The agricultural era was very established there. So there was a lot of time. Also, when you've got ample and you've got prosperous times, like America is a good example. Most of the top universities on paper are in America: Stanford, MIT, I think is #1, Caltech, Harvard, Princeton. It's very prosperous. You could argue, how the wealth was generated artificially, through the money system. That's another story. But it's very prosperous and very stable in the last few hundred years. So India had these golden eras and Sanskrit was the glue from one generation to another. And because the language was frozen, I think it was an advantage of preserving the older thoughts. It's always like we say, go to the elders to get wisdom. So you had that very mature wisdom, like. Advaita is a very mature wisdom. And Advaita was standing on the shoulders of, it wasn't like he just dreamt up this idea of Advaita, Shankaracharya, just by seeing it was the cobra it was in Sringeri. You probably know the story. There was a cobra shielding a frog and it didn't eat the frog, and then, that whole idea of ahimsa, of non-violence generated. I also think the strong vegetarianism in India, which is a culture of non-violence. Vegans would disagree with me, but I would say that I worked out, I did a spreadsheet the other day, I think it's something like 84 billion animals are saved per year. It could be more than that in India, just by the roughly 30 to 40% declared vegetarians. That's your Jains and your, a lot of Hindus are vegetarian, I myself am vegetarian. So it's got a concept of non-violence. It's there in Jainism, it's there in Hinduism, it's suggested in Hinduism like to be non-violent. It's even there in Ayurveda. They say it's, even though the medicinal animals are mentioned, they suggest for evolution or for your peace of mind to not harm things. So I think like the standing on shoulder of giants was there in India, and because the literary traditions were preserved, the paramparas were preserved, it was a great strength. Like now we're doing that in English, but it's just a very short era. We've got that, and the internet's obviously expanding knowledge sideways, that you can now, you don't even need a teacher, you can just go, okay Google, teach me about, you know, the other day I wanted to know different types of rocket fuels, and Google gave me a whole seminar, you know, on different rocket fuels. So we're in a very interesting age, you know, but we also have tools to destroy ourselves very rapidly. Like in a few minutes we can create an extinction for humanity. So with the power we've got of spreading knowledge, we also got the power of destroying ourselves. So, but India had, I think it was a phenomenal asset, what Panini did, and it's never really been done, that the grammar, I mean Hebrew was now done, the rabbis got together and the scholars got together and they revived Hebrew from the biblical Hebrew. So it was quite similar, there's an interesting parallel there, but now Hebrew is evolving and growing, but they kept some part of the core common. And it's a pity that Sanskrit isn't spoken more in India, because it's such a beautiful language. I mean, that's my, maybe, I was asked by someone to speak to Parliament about reviving Sanskrit somehow as an outsider, because I have no political agenda, I just have a love for the language. And obviously in India things get, you know, one group will say it's not representing us and so forth, and I say, well, beauty is beauty, you know, so everyone should celebrate and have beauty, basically. That's the, and richness and depth. And you can't argue against the richness, the beauty and the depth of Sanskrit. You can't, it's impossible to say that it's not rich, it's not beautiful, it's not deep. But Persian is also, many languages are also rich and beautiful and deep. But Sanskrit, I think it's quite unique in that way. I don't like to say it's the best in that way, but of the ancient languages, very, I mean, Greek has wonderful literature. And Latin is, you can read cookbooks in Latin. There's lovely cookbooks in Sanskrit, you know, from, even I was reading a 16th century cookbook. What's nice is a lot of it's in translation now, so you don't have to know Sanskrit. There is now, like a lot of grants, there was the John Clay, he was a billionaire from America who did the Clay Sanskrit Library. He was at Oxford and he said, I'm going to translate all the classics into, and then I think the one family, the Murti family in India, what's that, the big technology company that they did, this very big startup. They are doing now this Murti Sanskrit Library, and there's the Vande Mataram Trust. So there's a lot of these Indian initiatives to make the literature more known. Yeah.
Martin, I think we need to understand one thing, and that is, you know, you talked about the Vedas and the Sanskrit, etc. But I think the thought came first. And I think the language was just a means of expression. And I think that idea of the thought is still there. Is perhaps the language faded in some way along the line. But the idea, the inquiry about who we are, that existed all the way, although it may have been suppressed at some point in time within the colonial era, etc.
Yeah.
But I think that was just an artificial suppression.
So self-inquiry is quite an advanced sort of neurological process to have, and language, you should just see language as a technology. Like now your phone is a technology. It allows you to communicate and to research and to connect. Language is a way of storing information, and so there was the oral tradition, and then writing came later. In one of my slides there's the history of writing. Writing is a technology that came quite late, But yes, certainly like noble and good thoughts, we don't know where they began. They've been there in many civilizations, including India, back in long before there was Sanskrit, of course. So you're probably right. We can look at it from an evolutionary, biological perspective. There are many ways to analyze that question, because if you take evolution, then our brains have been changing over time, adding new capacities emotionally to understand things differently. It goes through periods of growth. And there's different milestones, like agriculture changed something. Fire was a milestone when we had fire. In the Vedic era, fire was worshipped, basically, as a deva, basically. And but it's possible. It's something. Philosophy, I think, can be debated. Some will say it started here or there. What we know is what we have right now in this moment. We have this. We have access to this ancient knowledge. Thankfully, it's preserved, and then we have a lot of contemporary knowledge that parallels or mirrors. Like if you take an analogy with medicine, Ayurveda has incredible. Their first antihypertensive was this Rauwolfia serpentina, came from Ayurveda. The rhinoplasty, the idea, and so many pioneering ideas. But then modern medicine has also developed. Chris Barnard was doing a heart transplant down the road. So we should take from everywhere, but it's very important to respect and admire the ancient traditions. They're critical. And India's had this deep, you could call it spiritual or self-reflective or philosophical or who am I question. It's been a big part of India for a few millennia. Asking what is the point of life, or is there a point or not?
There's a little Sanskrit university in Varanasi.
Oh yeah.
You know that?
I know there are quite a few. There's the Sampuranand, and there's quite a lot. There's Varanasi Hindu University, BHU, and then quite a lot of Varanasi is like one of the seats of Sanskrit learning. Pune, Delhi also to a large degree, and Pondicherry, and then Germany, of course, is great. England, South Africa, sadly not yet, but maybe we'll work on it at some stage. We'll see. It should at least have, one tertiary course here in the future. We could, because I think if you look at the interest people have. I gave a lecture at UCT and it was very well attended, and I think people would like to study it. And it definitely enriches your appreciation of cultures and languages, and it gives you a key to a lot of things that you wouldn't be able to unlock easily. So, any more questions? So we leave it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Is it on?
I was just on. Sorry.
Thanks, Martin. What a blockbuster of a performance, I must say. It was like a Bollywood movie. I really enjoyed it, and as I mentioned earlier, in India we learned Sanskrit when we were young, till grade 8. But over the years we just forgot and we just could not persist with it. And I guess the primary reason is that we did not have as good teachers as you. They were few and far between, so they could not really sustain the interest or did not themselves have the expertise. So you're right, there's a need for the government to devote more resources for proper training of the teachers and then subsequently teaching the kids. But your very interesting presentation has thrown open an entire new paradigm and new vistas into the learning of the language and the Sanskrit. So I'm sure if people they're interested in presentation, will be able to give them a copy. Thanks to Pramlaji as well for being a bridge between the consulate and Martin. When she introduced, we have been trying to have a talk by Martin since quite some time now, I think around 1 year now, but since Martin travels quite a bit. So thank you, Pramlaji, for your kind efforts and gesture in introducing Martin, as you always do with many other things, and support the consulate all the time. Talking about Panch Tantra, in India, all of us have grown up listening to stories of Panchatantra, not from the book, but from grandparents, parents, and all. Every evening, my son sleeps only when I tell him 2 stories from Panchatantra. Sometimes he takes to 3. But if you are interested, anybody in reading Panchatantra, we have entire volume in English in the library here, as well as in the India corner. So we are setting up this India corners in libraries of many universities around the world, including here in South Africa. So UCT has one already, UCT library. Stellenbosch will be having one very soon, and then we have one in UWC as well, and we are trying to expand it. So they have the entire collection of the Indian literature. So not literature of India written by foreign authors, but by Indians. It has got Vedas, it has got the authentic Indian literature and other scholarly works. So Panchatantra, in case you are interested. Talking about yoga in Cape Town, you know, I'll take this opportunity in the platform. You know, we have a yoga guru, Bharat is there, and we have been organizing classes by Bharat regularly. So there is one conducted every Friday in Rallens, and then Simone from Artscape is here. Simone, thanks for all your help. I will be starting another capsule in Artscape every Tuesday and Thursday from next week, it seems. So we have all the details. Should anyone be interested, or your friends and acquaintances be interested, kindly feel free to join one of these yoga sessions, and that will probably help you to know more about India, because yoga is one of the windows to reach India, as is the language, as is the many other cultural items. Birendra asked about motivation. What could be the motivation? Why should people learn Sanskrit? Very interesting, very nice question. You know, I'll regale you with one story. Around six years back, I was in London for another posting, and St. James School is in London, and we, from the High Commission there, we used to interact with them very regularly. And I went there, I was invited there for some function, I went there. So, you know, it was really delightful seeing all the white kids there, mostly chanting mantras in Sanskrit and talking in Sanskrit. St. James is doing a fine job, and they teach Sanskrit in primary, and then if you want, you can do it all the way till secondary. And then the principal there told me that you know, Sanskrit has had such a good influence on their learning ability, on their mental faculties, that many of their senior, and I think they have the Cambridge system of education. Many of them, they later on during placement, they join Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and all big companies, because their analytical capabilities are enhanced so much by learning this language. Ultimately, when you learn, the brain accordingly develops. The more you practice, the better it becomes. So probably that is one of the motivations well, people can find, that one of the tangible motivations. Of course there are many other motivations. So one last thing which I'd like to mention here is that it's not related to the talk, of course. Next week on 24th